is our 17th season. It's going strong only because people like you brave the weather and come out to see us. So thank you very much for being here. We appreciate you. We have a special treat for you tonight. The archivist from the Archdiocese of Nuns is with us, Dr. Emilie Leumas, and she is going to enlighten us about the Ursuline nuns and how pivotal they were in the history of what is now New Orleans and the educational field down here. I won't delay you any longer because I know you're anxious to get out of this cold, so I'll bring it up to us.
Thank you. I knew when I had to come 20 miles south, I expected it to be a little warmer. And I'm really glad that I work in an archives where it's cold, because I already had my scarves and everything. Because I'm used to documents needing to be a little cooler, but not bodies. So if you need to snuggle with the person next to you, I don't make any judgments, but you know, whether you like them or not, get more comfortable and cozy. Normally when I talk about the Ursulines, I do two things. One, I'm usually standing in a museum because it's part of the Old Ursuline Convent Museum, the history of where they started. And secondly, I talk about them from the perspective of they are praying for a miracle, the Catholic Church in the Battle of New Orleans, which I've done in many different places in the United States during the last 2 years, especially after the Battle of New Orleans. So this one's a little bit different because I'm going to start all the way from the beginning. Always part of my talks, you have to bear with a little bit of history of the Archdiocese, but this time it's not very long, but it sort of sets the stage. Erected in 1793 and originally known as the Diocese of Louisiana and the Floridas, the Archdiocese of New Orleans was a joint creation of the King of Spain and the Pope. Having roots in the Catholic realms of Spain and France, the Archdiocese has a distinctive history, unlike the dioceses established in the English and Protestant traditions of the Eastern Seaboard. After the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, New Orleans became a quote-unquote American diocese, but the traditions and practices, especially the linguistic practices, would take more than a century to completely change. The diocese originally encompassed the entire Louisiana territory, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Canadian border, as well as the Florida Peninsula and the Gulf Coast. During the first half of the 19th century, new dioceses were carved from the original territory. Today, there are 57 dioceses in the territory that was once known as the Diocese of Louisiana and the Floridas. We are but a fraction of that territory today, encompassing 4,208 square miles, 8 civil parishes, 111 church parishes, 8 missions, 2 campus ministries, 53 elementary schools, 9 high schools, 10 healthcare centers, and about 40 homes for the aged and the handicapped, as well as all the organizations directed by Catholic Charities, which of course right now is on the ground mobilizing to help our neighbors over in Houston. The archives of the Archdiocese of New Orleans documents a fascinating and colorful history, one that has its beginnings 3/4 of a century before the diocese was established, or at least that's when they started taking care of records. In fact, the archives, as an archives, predates the Archdiocese by 3 years. I'm getting ready to curate an exhibit on the tricentennial, and I was up looking at the documents that are at Notre Dame University that were part of the Archdiocese of New Orleans' collection, and there is a document from 1790, January 12th to be exact, so we have a birthday, where the auxiliary bishop, because we were not a diocese yet, his name, Bishop Cirillo mandated that there be an archives, that there be a safe place, in Spanish they wrote a safe closet, for the archives to be taken care of for the cathedral. So we've been making sure our records are safeguarded for a very long time. The mission of the Office of Archives and Records of the Archdiocese is to document and care for the historical records publications, manuscript collections, and related records documenting the Catholic experience in Louisiana. And records, of course, date from the beginning of the city in 1718 to the current. And I manage all of that, including the current stuff. In 2015, New Orleans commemorated the 200th anniversary of the Battle of New Orleans. While much of the United States overlooked the significance of the battle and its place in history, the Archdiocese of New Orleans curated an exhibit highlighting the power of prayer and the protection of Our Lady of Prompt Succor. While the men of New Orleans were armed to join the small number of American troops under Andrew Jackson to guard and protect the mouth of the Mississippi, the Ursuline nuns, along with the Apostolic Administrator, Father Louis Guillaume Dubourg, pious women and children, prayed for victory. This momentous event happened almost 90 years ago after the Ursulines arrived in New Orleans. Today, in the brief time that we have, I'm going to highlight the history of the Ursulines in the community from the time they arrived. I know this history extremely well because I graduated from Ursuline Academy on State Street in Uptown New Orleans. I began my years there in kindergarten, and I became what they call a lifer from kindergarten through high school, 13 years. And I certainly was loved by the sisters. I don't want to use the word harshly indoctrinated, but I was indoctrinated into the Ursuline tradition, and I became to know and love and bleed the history of Ursuline. So who knew that all these years from then that I was going to be prepared for the job that I do today? The Ursulines came to New Orleans, and they were from Rouen in France. This is a small drawing that is part of the Ursuline collection. Many of the things I'm going to be showing you today are part of the Ursuline archives that are not open to the public, but I do have access to these images to be able to share them with you today. When they were in Rouen, the King of France needed hospital nuns to care for the soldiers at the Royal Hospital that was here in New Orleans. The nuns, the Ursuline nuns, were not hospital nuns. They were educators. They educated young women in the tradition of St. Angela, and the Ursuline order had started in 1535. This is 1726. So the King of France is looking for hospital nuns, and in France, he goes to the Hospitaliers, he goes to the Daughters of Charity, and they all say, no, we're too busy, we've got other things we've got to do in France, we can't go over, we can't do anything yet. So the Ursulines raise their hands and go, we'll go, and we'll be happy to go. Can we educate women too? And they said, yes, but your first mission is to take care of the hospital, the Royal Hospital. So they said, okay. So they get on a ship called the Gironde. There are 12 of them. One of them is a novice. Her name is Marie-Madeleine Hachard. And she writes back to her father in France. Now, what I tell young children, it's not the emails of today, it's not the tweets of today, it's not the Facebook response of today that's just 3 sentences or 160 characters in a tweet. It is volume. I mean, her letters back to her father in France are about 10 pages long per letter, at least. And some of them, so there are at least 5 that we know of. They get published in the newspaper, and they start then being able to have access to the material. Marie-Madeleine Hachard also drew in charcoal the landing. And this is the charcoal of that. It was later done by an artist in the 1800s by the name of Poinsy, and that's the one you traditionally see in oil. But this is the original charcoal drawing. Marie-Madeleine Hachard is right here in the center. This would have been I think it was the Capuchins that we hear then, or the Jesuits. They were always fighting back and forth as to who was in control. But this, I believe, would have been then Father Beaubois. There's another elderly priest here. These are all the sisters. You will see here a Native American woman who's nursing a child. You'll see enslaved people here. You'll see a colonial woman that's holding a cat You can see the bonnets, the people, another enslaved person with a young child. So this is a great rendering of what it was like when they landed. The Gironde is back here in the river, although the Gironde never really came upriver. She really took some artistic license there. The Gironde landed at what they call Belize, not the Belize we think about in Central America, but the Belize, which was a port in the, at the mouth of the Mississippi River. They unloaded. This is August. It took them 5 months to get here, a journey that should have taken 2 to 3 months by ship, because they ran into pirates, they ran aground, they had to throw things overboard to be able to lift the ballast, to be able to continue to float on. There are stories of the sisters even having to go up on deck to make them look like they were soldiers, so that they would, the pirates that were circling them, they would think there were more men on the ship than there actually were. So the nuns have had this journey. They arrive here and they get to the mouth of the river and they have to transfer to flatboats to get up the river. And it takes them 5 days. Sleeping on sandbars. You remember how nuns used to dress? In wool, like black wool, full habits. It is August the 5th. They are in full wool habits, sleeping on a sandbar and getting up here to New Orleans. To not a very not a very civilized place quite yet. I'm not sure that it is yet. But anyway, I'll refrain from those types of comments. So anyway, so they get here, and it is hot and it is sticky. And I just can't even imagine going that far and then getting here and being elated to be here. Couldn't wait to start helping out. Now remember, they're here because they need to help with the Rural Hospital. So the sisters, they were promised a convent. Well, the convent hadn't been built yet. So actually this, I'm just going to go back. This is dated from September of 1727, telling them they're going to build them a convent, and this is, Royal Order of the King and all the information that goes along there. So they give them a provisional house. And I have 2 pictures of the provisional house as drawn by the Ursulines or drawn by someone else. There's this one, and then there is the second one, which again, this is the same book, same house. It was called the Coley House, or the Bienville House, Bienville's house, because that's where he put them. Now this is on the other side of the French Quarter. Not that the French Quarter is very big, but this is on the other side of the French Quarter from where they're going to build their convent. So this is the way they laid out the city early, but the city actually stops here. There's nothing else here. They draw these squares, but these squares really mean nothing at the time. These streets are not cut through, so this would be Charter Street. This is not cut through. This is all one block. And this is where the Ursuline complex was going to be. The Coley House is over here somewhere. There is a moat around the city. So along Dauphine here, this is a canal. They've dug it out so that the first cemetery is out actually back in here, this area here. It's called the St. Peter Street Cemetery. And they used to bury coming straight out the back of New Orleans into here. But this is a moat surrounding the city, which I just kind of find fascinating. So the sisters are here. The Royal Hospital is going to be over here. And they tell the sisters, you're here, but why don't you go ahead and start with the hospital? The sisters, being very bright women, told them, we're cloistered. We can't go out in the street and go to the hospital yet until you build us a school, until we get our convent. So it takes the Crown 7 years before they build them a convent. And the whole time, the sisters then are not doing the work at the Royal Hospital, but they are teaching young women. Because the women can come to them rather than them going out to the street and having to cross that city, that bad city from the 1720s something. So, in 1734, they finally give them, there we go, they finally build them a structure. This is what it looked like in 1734. This is the plans. These are plans that are in the Archives d'Outre-mer in Paris, excuse me, outside of Paris now, in Aix-en-Provence. And so this was the plan. It was 3 stories. It's, you know, you can see where the rooms are, you can see how it's laid out. This is the attic, this is what it looked like. What they did though, was the engineers weren't very good in constructing yet here. So they built it, but it started falling down just as soon as they built it. They had also started the hospital. The hospital was next door to them. So the first woman who decides to volunteer for the hospital, her name is Mother Frances Xavier Hebert, and she becomes the first pharmacist for the United States, woman pharmacist in the United States. And she grows her herbs on campus, right here in the French Quarter, and has all the medicinal, starts learning about the medicinal properties of herbs and helping out at the hospital. So she's the one that takes that charge and that ministry as everyone else is still doing education for young women. And this is the plan of that hospital that was next door. This is actually the pharmacy, the laboratory, the surgeon's room, and then over here was the priest's room. This, I don't know if you can see it, this is the key for that first building. And the sisters still have this key. So in 1745, Brutin, they decide that the building is falling down just as fast as they had put it up. So they decide to build another building on the same property, basically right where it is. And the only thing that they then have, they have some great plans. Again, these are in plans. These are all signed, 1745. This is where the orphans are. This is the infirmary for the orphans. The refectory where they're eating, so dining hall, and then this would have been upstairs, the rooms where they were living. This is part of the chapel, the hospital again, the Royal Hospital is here. And what this allowed them to do, and then this is the hallway where the sisters were, and then this would have been where the orphans were. So this would have been the chapel, and with these, the sisters could have then stayed cloistered on this side to go to Mass, and the men, the soldiers would have been able to attend Mass from this side without ever going into where the sisters were. You know, as cloistered nuns, if you've ever been in convents, you know that there's a section for the sisters when they used to be cloistered that they were not part of the everyday public. Again, this is that middle section where the church was. And a cutaway. And the reason why I'm showing you these is because this cutaway shows you these stairs. This is 1745. These are the same stairs that they used for the first building in 1734. Again, so this is the 34 building, and where the stairs are, and the same stairs. And today those stairs are still there. They're the oldest stairs in the country as far as colonial stairs in the way that they work, without having an underneath this. This is actually a wall here. But you don't have coming this way any kind of support. The support is all in the walls this way, and they're all cypress stairs. They're actually beautiful. This is, I have some pictures here that people don't normally see. Sometimes you can find them on the internet. But this is from about 1885. And you can really see what the convent looked like after many years. This is the inside, second floor. This is the third floor. I always get asked about the third floor because if you're ever in the French Quarter and you hear those lovely tours that go by, They always talk about there being vampires in the attic, and that no one survives going up into the attic. And I can tell you, I don't grow teeth at night, and I have been in the attic many, many times. But there are all kinds of rumors about what kinds of creatures are up in our attic. This is an attic view as well. I love these old pictures. These are from about the 1970s when they were taking pictures inside the building. These are the rafters, the timbers, and so this is the Norman truss system, which is part of the French, the way they built. There isn't a beam up underneath here, so the weight actually comes along here and down around the outside of the building, into the walls. So you don't have like these huge beams underneath here. So it's like reverse triangles all up in the attic. This is a little later. We don't have these palm trees anymore. So, a little more back to the history. That's the architecture of that building. The reason why we have an archives is because, when I mentioned earlier that 1790, when we start our archives, well, in 1788, there's a fire that starts on Good Friday. And as the fire is raging throughout the city, they go to Père Antoine at the cathedral and tell him, ring the church bells, we need to, sound the city alarm because the church is everything's on fire in the city. And he says, no, sorry, it's Good Friday, we don't ring bells, there's no music, just go door to door and let everybody know it's burning. Wow. It didn't go really well. The church burned down. He was throwing registers out into the square at the time, so the only registers that we have exist because he was throwing them out into the street. And the sisters, the fire was going towards the convent. The sisters, because that was happening, took a statue that they had that was called Sweetheart. And this is a great depiction of that. This is a watercolor that was done by Achille Peretti in about the 1890s. He did a series of historical watercolors for the sisters. And this is them taking the Sweetheart statue and putting it in the window. The Sweetheart statue came with one of the sisters in 1789. She picked it up off of a pile of rubble because she wanted to come to the colonies so badly. She said, if I get passage, I'm taking you with me. Well, she got passage and took it with her. And this is what they put out into the window. This is Sweetheart today. Sweetheart is about 12 inches tall. She's in the chapel on the campus on State Street. She's at the shrine. She has her crowns. She oftentimes has bars. She has thank yous from servicemen. There is an inscription, I think on this side, maybe over here, that says Sans Sulpice, which is where they were in France when she found her and brought her over. So after the fire, and things get back, quote unquote, to normal, we then had this little annoyance at the time called Louisiana Purchase. We've gone from from French being a French colony to a Spanish colony. You all know this history, to then being an American purchase. But part of that American purchase was the sisters did not own the property where the convent was. The church didn't own that property. No churches owned that property. And they were very, very nervous about what will happen because Louisiana Purchase happens. We're French. We have free people of color that have rights in the city. We're Catholic. So we do not look like the rest of America because they are Protestant, they are predominantly white, and they speak English. Okay? So we are the foreigners. They are buying a foreign country, literally. So the sisters are very, very worried, and they write to the President of the United States. And they write to Thomas Jefferson expressing their worry, and he writes back to them. And this letter is in their archives. It is signed by Thomas Jefferson. And he tells them, I have received, Holy Sisters, your letter. that you're in, you're really worried about your property, and he gives them their full assurance that they will own their property. They will not be made to leave the city. They will be able to function and continue on their mission of educating young women. Now, they had been educating women, not just colonial women. They've been also educating the enslaved, the free people of color, orphans, those that could afford tuition and those that could not. So they were, in fact, there's some correspondence early on from about the 1730s where there's a priest that is writing to them, telling them to stop and let all the young girls, no matter what color they were, play together in the yard. And the sisters, as they are still today, said, okay, and didn't pay any attention to it, let the young girls still continue to play together in the yard. They just sort of didn't pay much attention to what the priest would tell them. Which is a tradition with St. Angela, actually. If you notice the history of the Ursulines, they started as a company. And the reason why they started as a company, much along the lines of the Jesuits, is because they did not want to be controlled by bishops or be married to men. So they didn't want control of men in any way, shape, or form. They wanted to have control of their own money, their own property. They wanted to be able to come and go as they pleased. They wanted to be able to travel, and they did not want any man in any way, shape, or form, whether it be married or a priest telling them what to do, which is why they started the Company of St. Ursula rather than starting a convent. They continued to get information from the presidents. This one's signed by James Madison. There's some really interesting letters in their archives. We all know, and I'm sure you all down here, more so than anywhere else, about the Battle of New Orleans. But the religious community, as part of their daily life, the Ursulines record in their annals the historic events of the day. These annals are a concise form of historical representation written chronologically from year to year and day to day. One of the notable events begins on their page 138 under the title Attaque des Anglais, the attack of the English. It's a 3-page entry that describes the events surrounding the Battle of New Orleans. In the Ursuline annals the sisters are recording, they record the following. The community, together with all of the city, was in grand consternation over the subject of the attack of the English, and while all of the inhabitants went to the battlefield, all of the pious women and good black women went to the chapel of the Ursulines for prayer. We placed the statue of Our Lady of Prompt Succor on the altar, and our sisters made a promise that if the city gained victory, we would sing every year a solemn Mass in thanksgiving. Father Duberg, the Apostolic Vicar, celebrated Mass to pray to God of the army through the intercession of Our Lady of Prompt Succor to deliver the city from the evil by which it was threatened. At the moment of Holy Communion, a messenger arrived in the church and announced in a loud voice the defeat of the English. Thus, that grand army, commanded by generals proud of their ability in military art, was cut to pieces. That's a quote from the Ursulines. After the battle, the sick and the wounded soldiers were received in the house where we, the sisters, hold the class for the externs and nursed by the religious for 3 months. There were more than 50 beds. The boarders and the orphans have been gone since the 23rd of December, 1814. If you remember, that's when they were discovered on Billory Plantation. And the Ursulines became nurses again. The tender care of the skillful and charitable nurses was so highly appreciated by their patients that the British veterans were seen to weep like children when obliged to leave with their officers, while the Kentuckians and Tennesseans, no less grateful than brave, were for many years accustomed to send large baskets filled with bacon, fruit, etc., as tokens of gratitude to their Ursuline mothers, especially to Sister St. Angela Johnston, whose devotedness to the sick and wounded has entitled her a particular mention. Sister Angela was only a novice at the time, but she could speak English, while the other nursing sisters could not. When she was absent, the wounded men would say to one another, Wait until the little sister, the white-veiled one, comes. She will understand you and give you whatever you want. After the war, the sisters received a letter from A.J. Dallas, who was in charge of the military, and he talks about Jackson here. This is shortly after the war, but he's talking about General Jackson and telling them how grateful he is for all that he has done. Jackson visited them at least twice, and according to their accounts, it was on 2 separate occasions, one at the convent that's down in the French Quarter, and then at their second convent, which was down on Dauphine Street. The sisters in 1823 moved out of the French Quarter because it was getting crowded and they needed more room, so they moved down the river to their Dauphine Street convent. And then, this is a drawing of what someone assumes that looked like when Jackson went to visit them. This is the convent on Dauphine Street. And if you, knowing the city as we all do, the sisters had to move because the street, Charter Street, was being cut through, and it was cutting their property in half. So they decided to move out of the city and move down the river to Dauphine Street. And that is sort of near where Holy Cross is now. There's a Sisters Avenue, and if you think the Industrial Canal, it's pretty much right through their property of what was there. And these are actual photographs from the 1890s of the sisters at that facility. There's quite a few from the Industrial Canal, not the Industrial Canal, sorry. There was a small canal running along here that they eventually widened. Excuse me, that wasn't a canal, that's a railroad track. Sorry. That right there would be railroad. There's some great, they're always taken from this angle. And this is from their advertisement in a book about what you can, how to get there. So you take the streetcar, the Canal Street to Barracks, and these are the terms of how to come to school there. It's of course below New Orleans. The scholastic year of 10 months commences the first Monday of October and closes towards the end of July. Board tuition in French and English, embroidery, tapestry, and every variety of fancy work. Payable in advance. Per month was $18, per year was $180. There was an entrance fee, tuition, and half board if you were not doing sleeping at night, so you were then having food. And then this is per year. And then there was an entrance fee, and there was no deduction is made if you were absent for less than a month. There were extra charges per month if you took music, drawing, painting in watercolor or porcelain, oil painting, artificial flowers and waxwork, stationery, use of globes and ordinary infirmary expenses, washing, bathing season expenses, I'm not quite sure what that is, use of chemical and philosophical apparatus to be paid only once, and then the graduation fee. Not much has changed. We all have to still pay a graduation fee for our children to get out of school. It's the last thing that hold over your head, right? And then, of course, this is how to get in touch with the Mother Superior. Interesting that they list all the different sort of fancy-lady stuff that you learn how to do, but they weren't talking about much about the curriculum. As we would think of traditional curriculum, although they were doing all of those things in both French and in English. And this is the parlor. I love these drawings. This is the parlor of what it looked like then, and then of course this is the outside yard where the girls would play. Our Lady of Prom Succor is very important for the sisters because when the sisters got here, Mother Genestool in 1810, she was another one that prayed to be able to get passage. And they told her she would only get passage if she wrote to the Pope, and he wasn't likely to answer her anytime soon, so she wrote to him anyway and said, I really would like to go to New Orleans, and within a month she had an answer back that said, go ahead. Which she then said, okay, then I'll make a statue to Our Lady of Prom Succor. With what we know of Our Lady of Prom Succor, if you ever want to know and make sure it's Our Lady, as opposed to a different Our Lady, Guadalupe or any of the others, is Jesus will be sitting in her arms. He will be holding an orb. That's not the earth, that's the whole universe that he's holding. And his arm is here. Now, this figure is not Our Lady of Prom Succor. Whoops, I'll have another one later. I'll take it back. Wait a minute. That is, his arm is there, sorry. Notre Dame de Bon Secours, which is Our Lady of Good Help, he's actually giving, he's blessing this way. His fingers are up, 2 fingers. This one, Our Lady of Prom Succor, he's always got his arm up on her shoulder. It's little bitty things that they change depending on which Mary it is. There are like 400 different types of Our Lady, Star of the Sea, Our Lady of Guadalupe, and there's little bitty things. I didn't know many of them. I learned a lot after Katrina, picking up Blessed Virgin Mary statues and having to figure out which one it was. Our Lady of Prom Succor I always knew because of Ursuline. In 1890, she was crowned as the patron saint of Louisiana, and she was then gilded in gold. And this is her on Dauphine Street up in the sanctuary. Again, you can see the arm there. These 2 windows are now, when the industrial canal was cut through, and they made the sisters move yet again. So another, sorry, we're changing some. First we cut a street, now we're cutting this, and every 100 years or so they sort of replace the sisters. When they displaced them from the Dauphine Street convent, they were able to take some of the things with them. So they took these windows out, and both of these are on the State Street campus. If you ever go there, it's in the main hallway up one of the stairwells. This was after the coronation of Our Lady of Prom Succor, and this was done, and it talks about her becoming the patron saint of Louisiana. And this window matches those other 2, and we think they were getting ready to actually have this window created after her coronation, but because they then had to move, it was never made. This is the campus on Claiborne Avenue. The sisters, there's a great picture, and I wasn't able to get it. There's a picture of the nuns boarding the streetcar to leave Dauphine Street to come up this, to go to the Claiborne Street campus. But this is on Claiborne, so there's nothing here. This would be McMain High School. And you can see there's nothing. And this was like a garbage dump out here. I mean, it was cheap land, and they pretty much just put them out in the middle of nowhere. Again, this is early on. You can see the girls out in the hall and playing out this way. The street's very different. Little sidewalk. These palm trees that are no longer there. These are reminiscent of the other palm trees. This is the inside of the courtyard. We used to just roller skate around here. They don't let you do that anymore. But this is the inside of that area. This is all where the classrooms are, and all where, again, more classrooms, etc. The campus is beautiful. When I went there, they had a laundry where the sisters would do their own laundry with great big steam engines. That's what it felt like, because they had to do all that pressing for those large white stiff pieces that they wore. They also had an infirmary on campus. They also had an entire area where the sisters were. The sisters had their own kitchen. It was unbelievable. They had their own college there. The college eventually, when it stopped, became the kindergarten area. Now what was the laundry is now where the preschool is. This is Our Lady of Prom Succor in the shrine, where she is today. Again, you can see where Jesus' arm is. These are her feast day crowns. She has 2 sets of crowns, one for everyday wear and one for special occasions. And the special occasions are normally in a vault, and they are exquisite. The jewelry that's in it is just fantastic. There's a beautiful pearl, used to be a choker, that they used. It was a woman gave her a pearl necklace in order to be able to use for the crowns. These are the sisters. I have one last story about the nuns and a little bit of their history. A couple of years ago, when I was doing an exhibit about the Ursulines, about 2008, it was shortly after Katrina, and they were helping us with some things. We invited them to come down. These were the only sisters left in the city. We invited them to come down for a meal, and they came down. This was Sister Joan Marie, who was the archivist there. This is her blood sister, Sister Damien, and then some others, actually. Anyway, I can tell you who they all are, but it doesn't matter. These two were near and dear to my heart. Sister Joan Marie walks in. Sister Damien's with her. We're going upstairs to this beautiful sort of banquet. The Archbishop is there. It's just them, me, the Archbishop, the Chancellor, the Rector for the Cathedral. And Sister Damien, as we're going up the steps, she says, watch my sister real well, Sister Joan Marie, because she doesn't see very well. And I said, okay, that's fine, we'll be all right, I'll get her up the stairs. So I'm helping Sister Joan Marie get up the stairs, and Sister Joan Marie leans over. Typical, like if you had old aunts, that's what these two were. My sister's telling me not to let me drink tonight, isn't she? No, sister, she's not. I said, and if she does, you can just drink out of my glass. She said, okay. So we had this lovely spread because we were thanking them for everything. And of course, there were several courses. We had soup, we had a main meal, we had dessert, we had wine, and we had it catered in. It was just a really sweet meal, and we had a great time. And at the end, Sister leans over to me, and Sister Jamie, and goes, do y'all eat like this every night in here? I said, no, sister, we don't. Because if you eat with them, especially in the evening, it's usually something very small. They usually take their main meal at lunchtime, but sometimes they have bigger meals. Anyway, that's them. But Sister Joan Marie was the archivist for the Ursulines for many, many years, which is why I know this collection so well. Lastly, because of these sisters, I probably get who I am and my strength and my fortitude and education and love of education from them more than anybody else. And that is, I had a piano teacher that was from there. I had a long time, 11 years. And Sister Elizabeth Marie used to tell me, Emilie, one day you're going to work for the church. And I said, no, sister, I will never work for the church. It's not in my plan. And she said, I think God has a plan for you. And I said, okay. So with that, I certainly want to thank them and thank you all for listening. And I hope that one day you'll get to come down, if you haven't come down already, and see the museum of where they started. And if you get a chance to visit their State Street campus as well, they do have a small museum there, and it's extraordinary as well. Thank you.
Do you have any questions before we start tonight?
Would you just tell me about the plan for the 300-year, it's like 300 years of Catholicism?
Yes, I will. The exhibit opens October 13th of this year, and it will run probably for 2 years, so it will run the entire year of 2018. It is called The Church in the Crescent, 300 Years of Catholicism in New Orleans. It will focus on the cathedral as being the starting point for this entire area, because there is a story that Bienville traced across right there in 1718 and said, this is where we're going to build a church. And so we want to be able to tell that history of the church and Catholicism and how it grew. We are going to focus just on Orleans, just because it is the 300th of New Orleans, and try to incorporate as much as we can. But it's to show really where Catholicism started and the history of the cathedral, because it starts as a very small wooden and adobe parish church, little bitty structure, gets blown down in a hurricane, gets rebuilt, gets burned in 1788, has to go through a couple of more bills, gets, when we become an archdiocese, it then gets rebuilt. There's a bomb that goes off in it in 1918. I mean, it's, as I'm writing the script for it, it's like, okay, we can't put every board that I write a disaster. You know, it's like hurricane, fire, bomb. You know, it's like, okay, we have to find some nice things here. But that's what he said it will be.
Thanks.
Where was the old Royal Hospital located?
The old Royal Hospital, right where barracks, you know, so it's from St. Mary's was not there, the church that's right next to this one. St. Mary's comes along in 1845 for the bishop, because when the sisters leave in 1823, they give the building to the bishop, and then it becomes the archbishop's residence after that, and we become an archdiocese. And so the Royal Hospital stayed there. It would have been between Ursuline Street, which is where the Ursuline complex is, and then when you can't go down between Barracks and Governor Nichols, it would have been there. Yeah, it's no longer there, but of course there are at least the drawings of what was there. Somebody else had a question? Yeah.
About the history of the actual chapel where they prayed.
That chapel is no longer there. That chapel was known as St. Augustine, and it was torn down in the 1890s, and it was on a different part of the campus. That's my understanding. I don't even know that we have a picture of it, but I've heard different things. Do you know, Peter?
No.
Oh,
On
okay.
the land, it was concerned about their land, the land that was on, who owned the land, France?
Yes. So what happens even now, if you go over to France, the churches don't own their own property, which is what happens, the same thing happens to the church and to all the churches. And so because the crown owns everything, so the government owns the church too as well, since there isn't a separation of church and state under France or Spanish regime. And so when Americans come in, people, then they can own that land. Well, because of the vows of poverty, and this doesn't happen for the Ursulines, but it does happen like at the cathedral and several of the other churches in the area, including, Donaldsonville, all throughout Louisiana. When that happens, because you can't own the land, the men get together and go, okay, we'll own the property in our name for the church. Well, that works for a while until men decide they want to rule the church. And then they start deciding they don't like who the bishop or the archbishop assigns as a pastor, so they close their church because they own the property. And it was called mortiers because those are church wardens in French, the mortiers. So there's these battles between the mortiers, and it isn't until 1852 when they're beginning to get ready to do the new modernization of the cathedral, which is why you have the spires that look like they do now, because that changes. Yeah, I'll come back next year and do the church. The spires are different. So when that happens, they then actually have to get the courts to sign off and paperwork to go back and forth that the mortiers are not going to have caused trouble because they're now getting a loan to be able to redo the church and to renovate it. So there's this thing that happens all the time. If you're in Donaldsonville, the church there that was built in 1890, in 1870 when they began that church building, the church went up to a certain level, and then they had to fight. They threw the priest out. The priest had to go to St. Francis on Smoke Bend. That's where he was saying Mass outside of a little bit of Donaldsonville. The church stopped being built then. It took 20 years before they got it all settled, and when they went back to continue building, they couldn't get the same, bricks changed just a little bit, the soil changes a little bit. So the color, there's a line demarcation that the color changes in the red brick from the bottom bricks to the top bricks in the Donaldsonville church because of that fight with financing. Yes?
What was the extent geography of the archdiocese at its largest? How far out did it reach?
For the archdiocese or for the Diocese of Louisiana and Florida? Okay, so when we began in 1793, it'll be the extent of the Louisiana Purchase plus what was considered East and West Florida. So the entire peninsula of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, like what we call the panhandle, going all the way down, and then all the way up the watershed of the Mississippi. So all the way up to Minnesota, all the way up that way, and then all the way across the drainage.
So as those areas populated, then they were carved off?
Yes, as they were populated. And as Duberg is here, he then settles up in St. Louis because he doesn't like the debauchery of New Orleans and he doesn't get along with Père Antoine, so he decides to go up north. He's still in the diocese, so he can run the diocese from wherever he wants. He doesn't have to be in New Orleans, so he does that in St. Louis, and when they split the two, he then stays in St. Louis and we get another bishop.
What year did they leave Dauphine and go to?
1823.
Just a humorous side note, I remember reading myself when they had an arduous 5-month voyage coming across. They went up the Mississippi River. I think it was Sister Hachette who wrote about it, saying that the alligators, mosquitoes, and snakes were worse than the other 5 months.
That's true. She did write that. I mean, I can't even imagine what they had to go through to sleep on those sandbars at night with all those critters. I mean, I'm all for camping and I've slept on sandbars before, but I can't imagine doing it in wool and, you know, being out in the elements. That's just kind of, yeah.
Where are those first nuns buried?
Those first nuns are, well, you know, I read a newspaper account a good while ago that there was a burial ground somewhere on this campus, but I also know that the sisters, when they left and went to Dauphine, and then when they went back, when they're now on the State Street campus, there is a mortuary on that campus with, you know, bones and graves. I mean, they probably reinterred them, some of them. So I don't know whether they would have had something in St. Louis, number one, or if it would have been in St. Peter's, the cemetery, the first cemetery in the city before it was closed up. Anybody else? Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming tonight. I didn't do my usual thing in the beginning to introduce the usual procedures because I was so cold. I'm sorry about that. But out on the table are some programs. There's a list of all the lectures we've done in the past with some upcoming things for this year in it. There's also a sign up if you're not on our mailing list and you want to be. We prefer email. Go ahead and sign on there and we'll get you an email for the next lecture that is coming up, along with our St. Bernard History Lecture Series and our Vanguard meetings. We'll let you know about all that good stuff. Thanks again for braving the weather and coming out to see us, and we hope to see you next month. I'll be doing a lecture for you on the national anthem. Okay? Good night, everybody.